gotten in this debate many times over the years, and it's about renting versus buying. So I had a question submission, which if you want to send me a question, leave a comment below or hit me up on Instagram at JamesPhillip313. Send a DM with your question or an article you want to comment on, and I'll try to get you featured. But I had a follower send me something here, and I'll read it really quick, but they say, really contemplating being a renter forever, home ownership seems unattainable. Credit is good, money saved, but homes are way overpriced for my single income. Pros and cons. Well, I've been in your shoes before, and I'll give you some real life stories on why I rented, why I bought, and you can figure out what works from you based on those insights. But I grew up in an area without much money, working class neighborhood, and you didn't really have anyone around that had real money or knew how to manage money. My father worked in a steel factory with an eighth grade education, for example. And then I got a really good job in tech when I was about 19, started making money, started some companies, started making more money. I'm 20, 21 years old, start accumulating a little cash, and then the people around you start saying, oh, you got to buy a house. A house is your greatest investment. You got to buy a house. And it's like, well, I feel like I was, somewhat savvy at the time, reading financial books and doing all this stuff, but these people are, 40, 50 years old, and it's like, all right. And I wasn't smart enough at that time to sit back and say, well, these people really don't have any money. Are these the people I should be listening to? And you didn't really have the internet back then. It was just getting started to kind of go hop online and try to find someone to get advice from. But, at that time, I'm kind of taking my advice from people that have no idea what it's like to have real money. So I go and buy a condo. It's almost $250,000. And looking back, what the hell was I doing at 20, early 20s buying a $250,000 condo? But that's a whole other conversation. And I get there, and then, you deal with property taxes and homeowners association and water and sewer bill. Your electricity prices are more than everything just costs more when you have a home like that. And then it's like things break. I had to get the furnace repaired, and then I think the refrigerator died, and then you want to, this carpet's old, you got to change this carpet. And you start adding up the amount of money you got to put back into it, and you don't really ever recoup that money when you resell, which is another whole other conversation. But I started tracking everything, the amount of money that I put into this house with the property taxes, with the water and sewer bill, the higher insurance, the higher electric, the paint I had to put on the walls, the repairs, the flowers I planted outside. I started looking at the amount of money I'm spending on this place, and I'm like, in the long run, even with depreciation on this home, I could be doing better things with this money right now. And it's also a time suck. It's larger, there's more stuff to clean, more stuff to work on, you got to buy more furniture to fill it up. But it was just a time suck at the end of the day. So I ended up selling it. I got a good deal at a Village Green or something, and it was like $700 a month. It was a really nice place. And especially from where I came from, it was a nice place and a good area, and for $700. And for $700, if the refrigerator dies, I call the maintenance guy. If the furnace stops, I call the maintenance guy. If I got a leak, I call the maintenance guy. I didn't have to work on anything anymore. Nothing was my problem. And then my electric bill went down, and everything just went down. I knew exactly what my budget was. There was the furnace died. There goes $2,500. So I went from having a mortgage payment and property taxes and all these extra costs and repairs and time to just $700 a month. And what I did from there was I gained two things that were very valuable to me. One was my time, which now at this stage of life, I look back and time is the most valuable thing you have. If you're doing what you should be doing with that time, we're going to do another episode on that. But I gained time to go work on my companies, to read more books, to get smarter, to work on myself. And then that extra money I had, I was able to invest it into my companies. So now whether I invested it in the companies or if I took that same amount of money and say I invested it in the S&P 500, I think I would have beat out the appreciation on that home if I just would have invested that extra money in the stock market. So everyone's like, "Oh, you're stupid for renting. Renting's a waste of money." And I look back at some of those people, and it's like, well, you know, we can compare tax returns if you want. So, I used renting to my advantage. It was a very simple life, and I got to save a lot of money. It just worked out for me. And everyone's so caught up on everyone around them and everything on the internet and every article you read saying renting's a waste. I know some very wealthy people that have rented from time to time. Like, we just think about things differently once you start to accumulate money. And I think a lot of times that whole renting mentality, um, you're hearing it from people that never had any real money to manage. So, in the long run, is it smart to buy a home? Look, there's qualitative aspects to owning a home. It's those people that say, "Oh, I can't believe you lease a new car every 3 years," which I don't even lease cars. I'm just talking in general. Um, and it's like, well, I get to drive a brand new car every year, and there's a value to that versus driving the same car for 6 or 7 years. Like, yeah, 6 or 7 years, you'll probably save more money, but there's a value. You're driving a 5-year-old car that's beat up. It might be unreliable. The inside's worn out. It's not having the new technology. It doesn't look as nice. There is this other aspect. We want to kind of do this quantitative side to everything in life, and there's this qualitative side. What is the quality? What is the experience? And if you don't value that, then you drive the car for 6 years. If you like new stuff and you value that, then you don't mind exchanging more money for that. And that's where houses are the same thing. Living in an apartment and a house has two different values. In a house, most of the time you can do whatever you want. You can make as much noise as you want. You have more space. It's easier to change out flooring, and you can do whatever you want. It's a home. There's a value to that. You might have a yard. You can't compare the two in a sense. So it's one of those things that we get caught up in, renting versus homeowning. It depends what you want. It depends what you value. So I never thought of renting. Like, maybe I just wanted to go live somewhere. Like, I rented a place in Chicago and lived there part time. Like, I didn't think it was a waste. I wanted to live in Chicago. I went and lived in Chicago, and I went out and did exactly. I don't look at. You can't look at money in that like such an esoteric manner. It's like, what was I trying to do, and did I achieve what I wanted to do? And the answer is yes. We can't always look at exact money in, money out all the time, because there's that quality part of it. What is the value of it? What are you getting out of it? If we only just focus on numbers all the time, you're miserable people. The people that do that have the worst relationship with money. They end up becoming greedy, and they end up, you wake up at 70 with a bunch of money in the bank, but then you missed out on 40 years of experiences. So I just say America in general thinks of their home as their greatest investment. I think it's your greatest savings account. For the people that took the hit on their properties in 2008, no one's going to tell you that was a great investment at that time. Like, you watch your net worth sink by a lot if that's where all your net worth was tied up. So I think homes are cool because it forces people to save money. Even buying cars and other assets, even depreciating assets, forces people to save money. And I think that's one of the things that, for example, if you rented for 10 years and you had a home for 10 years, at least you were building equity in a home. But if you were smart, you could have been saving a lot of money renting and reinvesting that money into businesses or the stock market. I think the problem is, instead of investing that money, we take that extra money and we buy a bunch of stuff. We buy clothes, we go on vacations, and if that's the life you want, if you want more disposable income, then renting is great. But here's what happens: you got the two people with the same amount of money, salary, let's say over a 10-year period, and then one buys a house and then one rents, and the person with the house ends up having more net worth if the person who was renting didn't invest their money. If they blew all their money, then yes, the person with the home is going to have more money, and then you're going to go say, see, renting's a waste of money. It's like, no, what you did with the extra money is the reason why. If you compare the two, and the person, looking at this calculator here, if I buy, 800 rent, 125. You'd have to live in a, I don't know. Let's probably say 175, just to compare these two. Creative Cloud, get out of here. I mean, you're looking at renting $1,000 a month. I mean, you can get a decent place. I mean, when I say decent, like livable place for $700-800 around here. Um, Housing is so cheap right now, but then you add in property taxes and all the stuff to go with it. Um, as long as rates stay low, it's kind of hard to say don't go buy something right now because you're going to rent for here and then you're going to buy for this. So if we go back and say, well, let's see, they're adjusting this calculator, which doesn't always work that good, but it's just one of those things that let's try bumping this up. I've never used this thing before. Um, See, it keeps bumping up the renting cost, so I can't really give you a good example using this calculator. What I'm trying to say is, if you're renting for $800 a month and a house would have cost you $1,500 a month, then you're saving $700 a month just on money out, not including all the other expenses. Let's round up and say that's $8,500 a year over 10 years. That's $85,000. If you would have invested that in the S&P 500, that probably would have doubled twice. So you figure the first 5 years is $40,000. You might have turned that into 60 or 70 in the S&P, and then you keep doing that, and you might have turned that into like $150,000 over the course of 10 years. What if your house done the same thing? You need to go run those numbers at like 10% compound interest if you reinvested the dividends and whatnot. And this is one of those things that now if you rented cheap and saved that money, invested it into businesses, if you invested it in a market, would you come out ahead or at least equal to where you were with the appreciation of a home? I think it's possible. No one ever has this discussion though, because we've been told so many times by our parents and by online resources and social media influencers that renting's a waste of money. Now the difference is for that $800 a month less, $700 a month less, you're probably getting a smaller apartment and you don't have a home, so you do lose something for that $700. But if all you care about is a place to live and you want a simple life, then it might make more sense to rent and take your extra money and invest it. So I thought this calculator might help, but the way it adjusts here, it's not helping me explain anything. You can go rent apartments. I think that's the other thing. You start renting apartments for $3,000-4,000. That's a whole other conversation. Then you got to start comparing that to probably homes that are like $800,000 in terms of rent wise. My thought is with renting is you keep it pretty simple. You don't go get a super extravagant place if you want a simple life. You're trying to save some money. You're trying to reinvest that money. One more party note, and I've seen so many people around me do this over the years, and I just keep my mouth shut. But they'll buy. I'm just going to use some round numbers here. They'll buy a house for $500,000, and they'll keep it 5 years, and they'll sell it for $550,000. And then they go around talking about how they made $50,000 on their house. And I'm like, not technically on, paper, you made $50,000, but I'm like, well, how much did the realtor cost? And well, that was 6%. And I'm like, well, that's 30. So you got to take 30 off the 550, so now you're down to 520. How much was your property taxes? Or your property taxes were $6,000 a year. So that's another $30,000. So we were at 520. Now you're down to 490. So by the time you pay the realtor to sell your home and you paid your property taxes, you cleared 490 on the home. And then we won't even talk about repairs, maintenance, and all this other stuff, and the time you spent from cutting grass or the money you paid someone to cut your grass and all the fixes and all the stuff you did. You actually lost money on that house when you look at it. But, no one wants to sit there with an Excel spreadsheet and track every expense on their home, from every screw they bought, every can of paint, every fix they had to do, every repair, all the taxes, the water and sewer bill, taking care of the property. And then you add in the time. But what do you want to talk about the time? So, yeah, they go around telling you that they made $50,000 on their house, but by the time you subtract everything associated with that property, a lot of times you end up losing money. But then they'll still tell you that your home's your greatest investment. Even if you bought the house for 500 and sold it for 600 in 5 years, you take off the realtor, property taxes, and all the maintenance. Let's just say it's 75,000. Then you cleared 25 grand over 5 years. 10% would be on $500,000 of investment. You'd make $50,000. 5% would be 25. So you made 5% on your money over 5 years. Does that sound like the greatest investment that you could ever have? So again, I'm not here giving financial advice in any way, shape, or form. I'm just trying to talk about some of the differences between renting and owning a home. But for me personally, if I just would have dumped that money into the S&P 500 for 5 years or invested in some companies, I probably would have made a little more than $25,000. So anyways, these are just some of the things I'm trying to show you. Unfortunately, this calculator didn't work out the way I was hoping. I'm assuming the lower the rent on the apartment and the more expensive the house, then it's going to say, if I do 700 up here over, 275, now it says renting will always be better than buying a house. So it's one of those things that if you're living cheap on rent, I wonder how far we can go down. So now I see. It actually keeps it that way. It does that. So I was just using a calculator wrong. That's my bad. So it's 700 versus 200, 25 years buying. So you got to stay in the house for 25 years. So what point does it, at $700 a month, you got to stay in the house for 6 years for that to make sense. Okay. And I think this does factor in some of the other things I'm talking about. But, the one thing, rates are low. It is a good time. Maybe you're thinking about buying a small house and getting it kind of paid down and then renting it out. It's one of those things like buying a house right now is also, you're able to lock in money at a really low rate. And you got to factor that in too. Like, I don't, with inflation and what's going on, I wonder if we'll ever see rates this low again. All right. I'm going to toy around with this calculator more. I have not used it too much. Curious to see if it maps out with some of the things that I was talking about to make it easy for people. But that's about all I got for this one. If you have any other questions or you want me to feature something on the show, drop a comment. Until then, I'm going to catch you on the next one.